A Minneapolis mom is taking on Black Lives Matter protesters over the death of a man who is accused of firing bullets into her home. Police and that man were in a 6-hour standoff that ended in his death. BLM protesters are now going after the cops for killing a black man. They say they want body cam footage released. But Arabella Foss-Yarber, one of his neighbors, went toe-to-toe with those activists over the weekend, and she made it very clear this was not a George Floyd situation.
That man was armed. George Floyd was not armed. Breonna Taylor was not armed. This man intentionally tried to kill us. For 3 years I lived here, and none of you guys knocked on that man's door to see if he was okay. Not at all. He played loud music every day to cope with his mindset. There was casings in the hallway. The shot went through my door to the pillar to the kitchen. I was cooking food for my kids.
He's dead now, so that can't happen.
He shouldn't know. It doesn't matter. He shouldn't have been dead. Y'all should have came and helped him when he was alive.
No, I don't.
Now I can't get my shit because all you guys want to be here. My kids have to see you guys celebrate a man's life that tried to kill him.
Whew. Well, she's not wrong. Jason Rantz, Seattle KTTH radio talk show host. Jason, when you watch that video, you get a visceral, emotional reaction. But when you listen to the words, listen, she said, not George Floyd, not Breonna Taylor. Those people were not armed. Listen.
The issue here is that BLM activists, they never look at the facts of the case beyond whether or not police were involved in a shooting. That's all they look at. They don't care if the suspect is innocent or guilty because the BLM movement is not about the people they pretend are victims. It's always about the police. Their goal is to dismantle police departments. Their goal is to change laws around policing, not just defund. And so when that's your end goal, when you're partisan ideologues who are blinded by your belief, you're not going to really care about the people that these folks actually impact. And I'm so glad that this mother stood up to this mob, because that's what people need to do across the country when these things happen. They are almost always wrong. The BLM activists are almost always wrong on just basic facts of a case. So people need to actually stand up and say that.
You know, as you watch that video roll longer, she's actually then basically pushed back on by the BLM protesters. And they're saying, yeah, but you're not dead, you're alive. I mean, their reasoning in that moment for a woman who's hurting and frightened and trying to get to her kids inside is just so out of whack. I mean, who do they think that they represent in the streets?
Yeah, there's no empathy coming from this crowd because they don't understand what it's like to be a police officer, nor what it's like to be a victim of some of the people that police officers end up using force against. Your point is so well taken that there are actual victims here, and it's not someone who was shot by cops because he was the criminal. He was the bad guy. I understand that they make this argument about mental health, and I think that that's an important conversation that we always have to have.
Absolutely.
However, the best way to not get shot by cops is to not shoot at them or to shoot at innocent mothers who are cooking dinner for their kids in their apartment.
Look, she had the greatest question as she stood on top of that entryway to her car, her door. She said, why didn't you guys help him out when he really needed it? It wasn't a secret that this guy needed help. Those were her words. All right, let's move to this because it segues right into what you're saying. So the criminals are going to get that support from the street. BLM is right there to give them that support. But you know who else is helping out are the liberal DAs. And critics now keep piling on to one in particular, Los Angeles District Attorney George GASCON. Already facing a recall election there, GASCON is now taking heat for scrapping his office's lifer unit, which notifies victims and their families about their assailants' parole hearings. Prosecutors from his own office are accusing him of turning his back on victims. I spoke with Deputy District Attorney John Lewin about this last week. Okay, we didn't get that. We didn't get that little piece of information. But what we know is that these victims have a right to be told what's going to go on. Why would he do something like this, though? Is this part of this greater plan that you're already talking about?
Yeah, because I think that this is always an afterthought for folks like George Gascon and other liberal DAs, that they don't really care as much about the victims as they do about the criminals, because in their world, in their minds, they have completely conflated the two. So now the criminal is the victim, and that's the one that gets all the focus. Because if we said over and over and over again, they like to scream about systems of oppression, they need to be dismantled, institutionalized racism and sexism and all these things. And so they believe that someone getting caught up in the criminal justice system is through no fault of their own. It has everything to do with these systems that I guess somehow force folks into driving into a mother while she's,
so it's our fault.
Walking her child.
The people who live in the community.
Yes, that is how it's viewed, and it is a twisted and warped way of thinking, which is why we've seen the push, not just to recall George Gascon, but we're seeing this movement across the country. And by the way, this is happening in Democrat cities. These are Democrats who are saying you've gone so far to the left that we need to course correct because you're not going to.
Real quickly, and I'm going to ask my team if we can just get to AOC. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez now. Critics are calling her out for being what they call tone deaf in a complaint. AOC said in an Instagram post that her six-figure salary just isn't enough. Members of Congress make about $174,000 annually. But she says because lawmakers are required to have homes in both Washington, D.C. and the state they live in and represent, that the money doesn't cut it. And you say what, Jason?
So I say certainly the timing is not ideal. She's not wrong, and believe me, I hate having to agree with AOC, but I do think that when you are requiring someone to have two residences, particularly in high-cost neighborhoods, you are self-limiting the type of person who might want to run for Congress. Now, AOC did, and she's a horrible example, but there are a lot of really good people who simply can't afford to run because they can't afford to be lawmakers, and we don't like it when lawmakers somehow miraculously get rich while they're in office, maybe because they're taking certain kinds of votes that might have been influenced by people who could make them wealthy down the line. So maybe we should at least have a conversation about stipends for housing. Not for some of this other stuff, but for housing, I think, is a reasonable conversation, especially when you consider all of the hours that some of these folks are putting on when they work and live on the East or on the West Coast and have to travel to the East Coast. So I do think that there is a bigger conversation. I just wish AOC wasn't the person who's bringing it up, because she is not a good example of anyone wants to lead. She's an insufferable millennial. So she's still right though on this. Just wrong time, bad timing.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So if we don't want people to be tempted, then maybe we, as a society and those on Capitol Hill, have to take a look at our expectations for where they live and how they represent and all of that. That's really, really interesting. Jason Rantz, thank you very much. Always great to have your perspective.
Appreciate it.